The 100-Year Conspiracy to Destroy the American Middle Class. All right, we're going to break into this, but I'm going to show it to you, and it's not good, and it sucks. At the end of the day, it's still better today than it was 50 years ago, certainly better than it was 100 years ago. But that doesn't mean it will be better 50 years or 100 years from now. And in fact, if we can't call this stuff out, most likely we're going down to a bad place. That's in my opinion. And I'm going to show you how this is. All right, you ever heard of shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve in 3 generations? I've mentioned this a number of times on this video. That's kind of where I think we are. And again, we're on the downside of the shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve in 3 generations because of this grand conspiracy. At the end of the day, God wins. All's good. It doesn't matter. I love my life. I'm a hell of a lot better now than I was 50 years ago. That's a doggone fact. And I know at the end of the day, Jesus died for my sins, opened the gates of heaven, so we will all sit there in the glory of God when all's done. So I'm not at all worried about the long term. The short term, I am worried about it because I got 4 kids. I'd love to have a bunch of grandkids, and I think if we don't call out the evil doers, I think we're if we just sit there and say, "Oh no, Jesus was basically a hippie. He never called out evil," it's just crazy, man. Christianity is not tolerance for evil, that's for sure. All right, so we're going to show you right here. This is we talked about this in the live stream the other day. 100 years of U.S. consumer spending. We don't care about Boston and New York. We're just going to go down to the United States. And what you're going to see here is economic and demographic indicators of the United States. These kind of household income, household expenditures are so low, it's not really, we're going to overlook this for a second. Expenditure data for non-necessities. Now, this is interesting. Only about 22% of your spending went to non-necessities. I'll show you what the necessities are here in just a second. High family size back then, about 5. Low women in the workforce back then, and then percent of whites in the population, 85%. All right, pretty interesting. So what were the necessities, you're asking, right here? Food, shelter, and clothing. 80% of your expenditures in 1901 went for food, shelter, and clothing. And yet 20% went on more frivolous stuff, if you will. I don't know what, you can show you what frivolous stuff is here, alcohol, beverages, entertainment stuff. But at the end of the day, those big 3 items were huge as a total consumption of your overall expenditures. Pretty interesting. All right, let's keep going down. Now we're going to go down to 1918-19. You'll see an increase in income, an increase in expenditures. A little bit increase in non-necessity expenditures. Whites were still higher in the terms of overall population. Women were about 20% of the workforce back then, which meant men were 80%. The average family size was still high. All right, all good in the hood, yeah, for sure. And you can see right here the total expenditures on non-necessities went from about 20 to 22%. So about a 10% increase in non-necessities, a drop in the amount we're spending on food. All good in the hood. All right, so now let's go to 19, I think it's 35, 34, 35. Let's see here. Yeah, right here. There we go. This would be 19, hold on just a second, right there, 1930, 34, 35. Expenditures, and this is the middle of the Great Depression, expenditure shares on non-necessities has gone up quite a bit there. I thought that was pretty interesting. You can see the household expenditures and household income kind of leveled off, if not actually went down. Average family size, way down, way down. Look at that. Percent of women in the workforce going up. Percent of whites reached its peak right here, 1934, 1935, because we had no more immigration in the 1920s. We said no more, no mas. No more immigration in the 1920s. All right, so it's all good. Percent we're spending on non-necessities as you go right here. Non-necessities has gone from 20.2 down to 23.8, so another 10% increase in non-necessities. The amount we're spending on food due to refrigeration has actually fallen quite a bit, as a matter of fact. Housing has gone up. Housing is almost more expensive than food. Clothing is significantly reduced. Very interesting. So we're spending less on food, more on housing, less on clothing, more on non-necessities. That's all good. All right, now 1950, check this out. Household income and household expenditures are both rising. Expenditure share for non-necessities way high now. We're starting to really see a trend here. Oh, the average family size is going down from 5 just 20 years previous to 3. Percent of women in the workforce now is over 30%. Percent of whites is starting to drop. Interesting. That's going to show you some here. So let's keep going here. And you can see now we're spending 31.6% on non-necessities. Food is now 29%. Housing is 27%. The biggest expenditure is actually on non-necessities of the big 3. Interesting. And now let's keep going to 1960s. All right, so you can see here, whites are dropping off. The family size jumped a little bit because of the baby boom. The percentage of women in the workforce is now about 34%, which means the other is men in the workforce. So the men in the workforce are dropping like a brick in water. Average household expenditure, average household income, all good. Expenditure share for non-necessities coincides with smaller family sizes and more women in the workforce. And interesting. And that's for households, by the way, average household. And we're gonna go down here, and this is what we're spending our money on. 35% was on non-necessities. Food was 24% now. That's almost used to be 42% back in 30 years previous. Clothing is only 10.4. Housing is 30% essentially. So the big three represent 65%, or the other non-necessities. You can see alcoholic beverages, transportation, healthcare. I wouldn't say they're non-necessities, but you get what I'm saying. All right, let's keep going. Now, 1972, 1973. Average household income, average household expenditures going. Expenditure share for non-necessities, look at that. 45%, wow. Whites in population dropping pretty significantly, but not that big yet. And we were at 90%, now we're at about 86% or so. Women in the workforce, though, look at that. And now we're back at decline in family size. Women in the workforce, expenditure on non-necessities, less whites, less family size. Keep going. And we're going to come down here to right here, 1984, 1985. Expenditure share for non-necessities is now at 50%. 50% for non-necessities. And again, that doesn't, the necessities back in these days were, the food, the shelter, and the clothing. You still need health care, you still need transportation, but you see that. Household expenditures jumped because of the inflation of the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, and early 80s. Income jumped. Whites way down. Remember, this is under Reagan, dude. So you can see not just Reagan, but Nixon, Carter, and Reagan. Look at that. The percentage of whites dropping like a brick in water. Women in the workforce are now 45% of women in the workforce. 45% of women in the workforce. And yet the amount of men were dropping off significantly in the workforce. Average family size is now under 3. Expenditure for non-necessities going up. That'd be transportation, things of this nature, healthcare, entertainment. Whites dropping, women in the workforce, average family size dropping. And interestingly enough, let me show you something. Now, this is the 1970s, but I want to show you something here. Household spending patterns continued to change as families allotted less of their incomes for necessities. Changes in the demographic characteristics of families contributed to these modifications. Women's shares of the U.S. workforce had risen to 37%. Average family sizes decreased. Rising incomes had permitted more people to buy homes in the suburbs and purchase cars. Check this out, though. Throughout the country, local and regional economies have begun to shift away from manufacturing and into service, trade, education, healthcare, and government. Manufacturing is a man job. Manufacturing and things of this nature, construction, services, trade, education, healthcare, and government are significantly heavy towards women. Interesting. And with that rise of decline of men-oriented jobs, you see a rise in women-oriented jobs, and as such, more women in the workforce, less of a family size. Percent of whites in the population dropping off because not only we're shifting away from manufacturing and other construction businesses and things of this nature, but we're also importing tons of illegal immigrants for cheap labor. So men's work needs were not being met. We're being replaced by women. We're being replaced by women in the workforce, which meant less family size. So we could spend more money on crap. Nicer cars, nicer houses, and all that stuff. And whites are dropping. And as Nixon, Carter, Reagan, they're all part of it, man. Bush. So now let's go down to right here, 1996 and 1997. Now you can see things are leveling off for expenditure share on non-necessities in terms of housing, shelter, clothing, and food. Because at some point, you can't just keep having all your expenditures go to non-necessities. Average household expenditures are jumping through the roof. Average family size are way down. Percent of women in the workforce is way up. Percent of whites are way down. You see what's happening here is we have now 2-income households, just like Elizabeth Warren talked about, of all people. 2-income households. And when you have two income households, you have less time for children, you have more time for non-necessity expenditure, and we're replacing men's job with women's jobs and illegal immigrant cheap labor. So we can spend more money because we have two people working. But you can see right here, let's check this out. The size of the average household is now just 2.5, which is half of what it was, 60 years ago. And a quarter of U.S. households consists of only one person. Only 10.5% of households consist of five or more. Male labor force participation rate had continued to decline to 75%, where the women made up 45% of the workforce. The female rate had continued to rise to 59.3% in 1996. Look what we're spending our money on. Only 13.8% for food, only 5.1% for clothing. Why? Because we're importing all our clothing. Housing is still the biggest expense because you can't really import housing. Other is 49%. Look at that. How much food are we importing? We shut down the pineapple business in Hawaii to import cheap Costa Rican pineapples. How many of that happens all over the place, man? This is 1996, not even today. You can see our entertainment. We're spending 5.3% of our stuff on entertainment, personal care, and products. I mean, look at all this miscellaneous. We're spending crazy amounts of money on things we actually don't really need. Healthcare, we're spending 5.3% on relative to what we used to spend before. Now, I'm not saying it's not a necessity, but now here we are in 2000. Look, the expenditure share for non-necessities has leveled off here. The whites are way down. And a lot of this, don't forget, we're including Middle Easterners as part of the white population too. So if you're an Iranian Persian, you're considered a white in the United States, which is crazy to me. Percentage of women in the workforce now, 45%. Average family size leveling off at 2.5. Household income and expenditures, that's great because we have so many two income families. Check this out. The highest employment was in management or professional occupations, 24%. After that came technical, sales, or clerical operations. Fabricators or laborers, only 10%. Service workers were 10%. Construction workers were 4.6%, and the self-employed was 4.4%. Male labor is now 74% participation, where women are making up 46% of the workforce. Female participation was about 60%. So that means of all women, 6 out of 10 were working. We're only 7.4 out of 100 of 10 men were working. Some will say that's good, and I vehemently disagree with that. So let me just show you something else here. We're going to go to old We're going to go to this freaking Claude. And I said, Claude, compare median wages to median home prices since 1990. And they did, and they said right here, here's our median wage to median home prices since 1990. And I said, but I don't want, that's what they came up with. I said, then I said, wait, you're screwing that up. I said right here, hold on a second. I said, are you confusing median wages with median household income? And they absolutely were. And he said, you're absolutely right. I was conflating median wages with median household income, which are two very different metrics. So here we got median wages is right there in the blue. 58K is our median wage in 2024. The median household income is 81K. What does that represent? Two income families. All right. So our median wage went from, does it say on here, $400 in 1900, and our median household. Let's see. I don't even want to. I want to use households starting like right about there. When about 60. We'll go right here. 1950. We'll go 1960. When about 65% of people owned a home by this point. You don't really want to use it here because very few people actually own a home. But in here, after the GI Bill, the VA and all that stuff, now we start having 2/3 of the population owns a home. And the median individual wage back then was $5,000, where the household income was $6,000. All right, but now, and the median home price was $23K. Now we fast forward here, and with more cheaper lending and stuff, the median household income is right there, 81. But the median wage for just the man to work is only $58,000. So the wife has to work to add that other $23,000 in which to buy a house that's $417,000. If you just look at median household income, you're looking at it incorrectly because the median household income it includes both laborers, a woman and a man. And that's what destroyed the family. They said, no, man, you need two people to work to be able to afford a house. And now we can't afford a house. So now we're going back to the worst case scenario, a renter society with no children. Oh, but you get to freaking spend all your discretionary money. But this is doomsday scenario stuff. They sold us a bill of goods that says, hey, get your wife to work. And watch this. Watch the freaking, this is the trick. Right there. The prices went down on homes relative to income. So everyone bought into the mentality that, hey, we can afford a fancy house. It was an illusion. Yes, you could right here. But then look at this. You said, no, you can afford it. It's easier to afford a house if both people work. It'll be great. You can have a nicer house. And so everyone jumped into it. They said, let me sacrifice children so we can have a nicer house. I'll work. The husband will work. The wife will work. And it'll be great. But then they took it. Look at this. They sold us all a bill of goods because they conflated household income with wages. And when you're conflating household income with wages, you're conflating two incomes, your husband and wife, if you're even married anymore, where there used to be a one man. And then I'm just telling you, man, look at this. In 1960, a man's wages was 5, a household price was 23. So basically 5-to-1 ratio. Now a man's wages right here is freaking 58 and a house is $417,000. What is that, an 8-to-1 ratio? So you have to have your wife work. And then you're like, I'm paying all this money for a house, I can't afford kids. And this is the shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve in 3 generations. They said we were renters back then with large families and a man working and the wife staying home to raise the families. And now, at the latter part of my generation, we are 2-income households living pretty large, and the baby boomers and whatnot. 2-income families with a few kids, but not as many as what we used to have, but we're living pretty large, and we can afford a house. Now, though, it's going to be 2-income families with no children and renting again. It's the worst case scenario. Rents, no children, and 2-family households, 2-income households, to get the wife out of the home so she can have kids. And if you're even married. So you have a renter society, non-married people or married people with both people working. If you're even married, the majority of families, I think, in the United States aren't even married anymore. The majority of households. It's freaking evil, dude. Never mind the lack of whites in there. The whites are good. I think the whites are actually a minority now. If you a majority, whatever the hell it's called. I don't think there's 50% of the population if you just true European whites. So what's going to happen for the next 50 to 100 years? Fewer household formation, fewer children, fewer people able to buy a home, and more renters. Freaking crazy. All right. Again, God wins, but not to point this out. I don't know, man. I don't know. And I'm not a doomsdayer at all. But not to point this out, dude, is irresponsible, especially when you see it. And unfortunately, it took me too long to see it. But thank the good Lord. I was raised Catholic, and my wife was Catholic, so we knew we had to plug some kids out there. You see what I'm saying? That's what a Catholic's job is, to have babies. If you're not having babies as a Catholic, you're freaking wrong. All right, God bless. Love your thoughts. We'll see you.